Conservational biology. Biodiversity. Conservation biology is the management of natural and nature and of Earth's biodiversity with the aim of protecting species, their habitat and the ecosystem from excessive rate of extinction and the erosion of biotic interactions. It is an interdisciplinary subject drawing on natural and social science and the practice of natural resource management. The biodiversity, short for biological diversity, refers to all the population, species, and community in a defined area. In contrast to the more specific term, the species diversity, the term biodiversity was coined to emphasize the many complex kinds of variations that exist within and among the organisms at a different level of organization. The term biodiversity refers to the totality of genes, species, and ecosystem of the region. Level of biodiversity. The biological diversity includes three hierarchical levels: the genetics, species, and ecosystem diversity. 1. The genetic diversity. The genetic diversity refers to the variation of genes within a species. The difference could be in alleles, in entire genes, or in chromosomal structure. The genetic diversity enables the population to adapt to its environmental and response to natural selection. The amount of genetic variation is the basis of speciation. It has a key role in the maintenance of diversity at the species and the community level. The genetic diversity within a species often increases with the environmental variability. 2. Species diversity. The species are distinct units of diversity, each playing a specific role in an ecosystem. The species diversity refers to the variety of species within a region. The simplest measure of species diversity is species richness, that is, the number of species per unit area. Generally, greater the species richness, the greater is the species diversity. The number of individuals among the species may also vary, resulting into differences in evenness or equitability and consequently in diversity. Species richness and evenness. The species richness is only one aspect of diversity. Not all species exist in equal number. Some are rare, some are common but not numerous, and other are very abundant. Imagine two forest stands, both of which contains a total of 100 individuals belonging to 5 different species. In one forest stand, there are 20 individuals of each species. In the other, one species has 60 individuals, which each of the other 4 species has 10 individuals. These two samples differs in the property called evenness. The first, in which the species are represented by the same number of individuals, is more even and thus has one of the essential elements of being more diverse than the second. The species diversity of a community depends on both its richness and evenness. Higher species number with the individuals more evenly distributed among them contribute to higher community diversity. 3. Ecosystem diversity. The ecosystem includes all the species plus all the abiotic factors characteristic of region. For example, a desert ecosystem has a soil, temperature, rainfall patterns, and solar radiation that affects not only what species occurs there but also morphology, behavior, and the interaction among those species. The ecosystem diversity describes the number of niches, tropical levels, and various ecological processes that sustain energy flow, the food web, and recycling of nutrients components and gradients of biodiversity. Whitaker in 1972 describes 3 terms for measuring the biodiversity over spatial scales: alpha, beta, and gamma diversity. The alpha diversity refers to the diversity within a habitat or ecosystem. It is expressed as a few species per unit area. If we examine the change in species diversity between two ecosystems, then we are measuring the beta diversity. We are counting the total number of species that are unique to each of the ecosystem being compared. The beta diversity allows us to compare the diversity between the ecosystem. The gamma diversity is a measure of the overall diversity for the different ecosystem within a region. gradients. The biodiversity varies with the changes in latitude or altitude. As we move from the pole to equator, the biological diversity increases and vice versa. The increase in the species richness or biodiversity that occurs from pole to the tropic often refers to as the latitude gradient in species diversity, and it is one of the most widely recognized pattern in the ecosystem. Similarly, the altitudinal variation also causes changes in the biological diversity. A increase in the species diversity occurs from lower to higher altitude on a mountain. A 1000 m increases in altitude results in the temperature drop of about 6.5 degrees centigrade. A drop in temperature and greater seasonal variations at higher altitude are major factors that reduces diversity magnitude of biodiversity. The known and described number of species on Earth is between 1.7 and 1.8 million. There are many more species that have not yet been described. The current estimates of the total number of species ranges from 5 to 30 million. The known species are unevenly distributed across the taxonomic group. About 61% of these species are insect. The table gives below describes the approximate number of species on Earth. The approximate number of species on Earth, a group and a number of species. Mammals 6,004. Sorry, mammals 4,650. Birds number of species 9,700. Reptiles number of species 7,150. Fishes number of species 26,959. Amphibians number of species 4,780. Insect number of species 10 lakh 25,000. Higher plants 2 lakh 70,000. Algae 40,000. Protozoa 40,000. Use of biodiversity. At the ecological level, biodiversity provides the condition and drives the process that sustain the global economy and our survival as a species. The benefits and the services provided by the ecosystem includes: one, ecosystem service. The biodiversity is essential for the maintenance of ecosystem and their sustainable utilization. These services includes maintenance of gaseous composition of atmosphere, climatic control by forest and oceanic system, and natural pest control, pollination of plants by insects and birds, formation and protection of soil, conservations and purification of water, and nutrient cycling. 2. The prevention and mitigations of natural disaster. The forest and grassland protects the landscape against the erosions, nutrition loss, and landslides through the binding actions of the root. The ecosystem bordering regularly flooding rivers, floodplains, forest and wetlands helps to absorb excess water and thus reduce the damage caused by the flood. 2. Provision of food security and drug medicines. The biodiversity is of use to modern agriculture in two ways. One, as a source of new crop. Two, as a source of new biodegradable pesticides. The biodegradable provides most of our food stuffs. The wild biodiversity provides a wide variety of important food stuffs, including the fruits, game meats, nuts, mushroom, honey, spices and flavorings. These wild foods are especially important when agricultural supplies failed. Indeed, the wild biodiversity guards against the failure to even the most advanced agricultural system. For example, the productivity of many of the developed world's agricultural crop is maintained through the regular assimilation of new genes from wild relative of these crops. These wild genes resist the pest and disease that possesses an ever evolving treat to harvest. The wild diversity is also a rich source of substances with therapeutic properties like morphine used as an analgesic, quinine used for the treatment of malaria, and Taxol, an anti-cancer drug. 4. Aesthetic and cultural benefits. The biodiversity has also great aesthetical value. The aesthetical aspects includes ecotourism, bird watching, pet keeping, and gardening. 5. Threats to biodiversity. The most obvious manifestation of biodiversity losses is the extinction of species. That is a natural phenomenon. The species has been going extinct since life began. Indeed, it is estimated that many more species have gone extinct than exist at present. What's worrying is the rate at which the species are dying out. Since the total number of species on the earth can only be estimated, the exact rate of current species loss is difficult to gauge. Working from the conservation estimate that the earth is home to 10 million species in all. It is estimated that between 0.2 and 0.6 percentage of species are being lost every year. This rate is at least 10,000 times greater than the background or natural rate of species extinction, as estimated using the fossil record. The main cause of biodiversity loss are considered under the following headings. 6. Habitat and loss and habitat loss and fragmentation. The destruction of habitat is the primary reasons for the loss of biodiversity. When people cut down trees, they fill a wetland, plow grassland, or burnt a forest. The natural habitat of a species is changed or destroyed. These changes can kill or force out many peoples, animals, and microorganisms, as well as disrupts complex interactions among the species. With the fragmentation of a large forest tract, the species occupying a deeper part of the forest or the first to appear. 7. Invasive species. The sudden introduction of a invasive, also called introduce exotic and non-native species to a given ecosystem severely disrupts the normal functioning of ecosystem with disastrous consequence for the native species. Such introductions are usually the results of human activities. The accidental introduction to the Black Sea of Atlantic comb jellyfish species 15, a well-known examples. These invaders have competed native fauna and now comprises some 95% of Black Sea's total biomass. In the USA, meanwhile, the introduction of exotic species has been implicated in the close to 70% of past century freshwater fish extinction. 8. Over exploitation. The term exploitation refers generally to the human use harvesting of wild organisms at rate exceeding the ability of population to those species to rebound. The over exploitation of a species reduces the size of its population to an extent that it becomes vulnerable to extinction. The decline in Earth's largest territorial animal, the African elephant, is an classical example of the impact of overhunting. Largely because of trade in ivory, the elephant population has been declining in most of the Africa. 9. Disturbance and pollutions. The communities are affected by natural disturbance such as fire, tree fall, and defoliation by insects. The man-made disturbance differs from natural disturbance in intensity, rate, and spatial extent. Pollutions may reduce and eliminate the populations of sensitive species. 10. Extinction of species. Extinction is a natural process. The extinction, the complete disappearance of a species from Earth. It is an important part of evolution of life on Earth. The current biodiversity of species is a product of a process of extinction and speciation throughout the previous 3.8 billion years history of life. It is assumed that the between 5 and 50 billion species have lived at some times during the history of the earth. Therefore, 99.9% of all the life has been existed is now extinct. However, the extinction has not occurred at a constant pace through the Earth's history, and not same for all the species. There are 4 types of extinction process. 1. Natural extinction. With the change in environmental conditions, some species disappears and others which are more adapted to the change condition replace them. 2. Mass extinction. There have been several periods in the Earth geological history when many species become extincted because of catastrophes. 3. Anthropogenic extinction. This man-made extinction represents a very severe depletion of biodiversity, particularly because it is occurring within a short period of time. 11. The susceptibility to extinction. The susceptibility to extinction is not the same for all the species. Some species are more susceptible to extinction than others. In general, the species with the characteristics like a large body size, small population size, low reproductive rate, feeding at high trophic level in the food chain, fixed migratory route, narrow range of distributions, are more susceptible to extinctions. 12. IUCN Red List category. The IUCN Red List is a category of taxa that are facing the risk of extinction. The use of Red List are: 1. Developing awareness about the importance of threatened biodiversity. 2. Identification and documentation of endangered species. 3. Providing a global index of the declined biodiversity. And 4. Defining the conservation priorities at the local level and guidance guiding the conservation action. The World Conservation Union has recognized 8 red list category of species: extinct in the wild, critically endangered, vulnerable, lower risk, data efficient, and not evaluated. The red list category and definition. Red list category: extinct. Definition: a species is extinct when there is no reasonable doubt that the lost individual has died. Example: Doko passenger pigeon. 2. Extinct in the wild. Definition: a species is extinct in the wild when exhaustive service is known and or expected expected habitats that fails to record an individual. Example: Alagoas curacao. Critically endangered. Definition: a species is critically endangered when it is facing an extreme high risk of extinction in the wild in the immediate future. Example: Gharial. Endangered. Definition: a species whose number are so small that the species is at a risk of extinction. Examples: giant panda, snow leopard, tiger, Indian rhinoceros. Vulnerable. Definition: a species is vulnerable when it is not critically endangered or endangered, but it is facing a high risk of extinction in the wild in the medium term future. Examples: cheetah, lion, polar bear. Low risk. Definition: a species is at low risk when it has been evaluated and it does not satisfy the criteria for critically endangered or vulnerable. Example: blue-billed duck, solitary eagle. Data deficient. Definition: a species is data deficient when there is inadequate information to make or direct or an indirect assessment of its risk of extinction. Not evaluated. Definition: a species is not evaluated when it has not yet been assigned against the above criteria. In India, 44 plant species are critically endangered, 113 endangered, and 87 vulnerable. Among animals, 18 are critically endangered, 54 endangered, and 143 vulnerable. List of few critically endangered and endangered species of India. Critically endangered animals: pygmy hog, Namdapha flying squirrel, Malabar large spotted civet. Endangered: Asian elephant, lion-tailed macaque, red panda, Indian rhinoceros. Plants: critically endangered: Berberis nilgirensis, Dipterocarpus grandiflorus, Ilex Cahasiana. Endangered: Caparis pachyphila, Pterocarpus santalinus, Madaca diplostimon. Conservation of biodiversity. Biodiversity is a source of significance economic is aesthetic, health, and cultural benefits, which forms the foundations for sustainable development. However, there is a general scientific conscious that the world is rapidly becoming less biological diverse in terms of genes, species, and ecosystem. The reasons for this is clearly anthropogenic. The scale of human impact on biological diversity has been increasingly exponentially, primarily because of worldwide pattern of consumption, production, trade, agriculture industry, and settlement development and human population growth. Neither the economic nor the ecosystem value of biodiversity is yet well understood. There is insufficient knowledge of interdependence of species within the ecosystem and the impact of extinction of one species on other. Hence, reducing the rate of biodiversity loss and conserving still existing biodiversity as a basis of sustainable development remains major global challenges. The conservation is the protection, prevention, management, or restoration of wildlife and natural resources such as forest and water. Through the conservation of biodiversity, the survival of many species and habitat which are threatened due to the human activity can ensure. In situ and ex situ conservation. The conservation will broadly be divided into two types. In situ, the the conservation of habitat and ecosystem where organisms naturally occurs. The SCAD grows biosphere reserves, territorial and marine national parks, wildlife sanctuaries are all examples of in situ conservation. Ex situ, the conservation of elephants of biodiversity out of context of their natural habitat is refers to as ex situ conservation. Zoos, botanical park, and gene banks are examples of ex situ conservation. Conservation in situ, in vivo, and in vitro. In vivo, in situ, and ex situ. In situ in the natural habitat and protection environment, and ex situ in an artificial environment, zoos, botanical garden. In vitro, cryo conserved materials, oocytes, embryos, and somatic cells. The overview of basic conservation scheme. Gene banks function as a ex situ conservation where a sample of genetic variabilities of the species is conserved in an artificial environment outside of its normal habitat. In general, the seed of plant species are stored in environments at low temperature and humidity. In these conditions, their viability can be preserved for several decades. Several genes banks around the world functions as a centralized storage area for the germplasm of certain species. In situ conservation strategy. The in situ approaches includes the protection of a group of typical ecosystem through a network of protecting area. These are area of land and or a sea, especially dedicated to the protection and maintenance of biological diversity and of natural and associated cultural resources. The national park or reserves of land usually declared as and owned by the national government, protected from most human development. The biosphere reserves or a special category of a protected area of land and or coastal environment where people are an integral component of the system. These are representative examples of natural biomass and contains a unique biological communities. The concept of biosphere reserves was launched in 1971 as a part of UNESCO Man and Biosphere program. The first biosphere reserves of the world was established in 1979. Since then, the network of biosphere reserves has increases to 531 in 105 countries across the world, MAB, and 2008. Now there are 18 biosphere reserves in India. These reserves are rich in biological and cultural diversity and encompasses unique features of exceptionally pristine nature. The goal is to facilitate the conservation of a representative landscape and their immense biological diversity and cultural heritage, foster economic and human development, which is culturally, ecologically sustainable, and to provide supports for research, monitoring, education, and information exchange. objective. Each biosphere reserves is extended to fulfill three basic functions, which are complementary and mutually reinforcing. A conservation functions to contribute to the conservation of landscape, ecosystem, and the species variations. A development functions to foster economic and human development which is socio-cultural and ecologically sustainable. 3. A logistic functions to provide supports for research, monitoring, education, and information exchange related to local, national, and global issues of conservation and development. UNESCO 2005. A biosphere reserve consists of core, buffer, and transition zone. The nature or core zone represents an undisturbed or less disturbed area of a representative ecosystem. The buffer zone surrounds the core zone and is managed for research, education, training activities. The traditional activities, including the timber productions, hunting, fishing, and grazing, are permitted. The transition zone, the outermost part of the biosphere reserves, is an area of active cooperations between the reserve management and the local people, wherein activities like settlements, cropping, forestry, and recreations and other economic uses continues in harmony with the conservation goals. Hotspots. The concepts of biodiversity hotspots originated with the British ecologist and writer Dorman Mayer in 1988. A hotspot is a relatively small area with an exceptional concentration of endemic species and many endangered and threatened species. To qualify as a hotspot, a region must meet two strict criteria. It must contain at least 1,500 species of vascular plants, approximately 0.5% of the world's total as endemics, and it must have lost at least 70% of its original habitat. Thus, hotspots are area with the richest and most threatened resource of plants and animals life on Earth. The Norman Mayer developed the hotspot concepts to designate the priority area for in situ conservation. A key criteria for determining the hotspot are: 1. The number of endemic species, that is, the species which are found nowhere else. 2. The degree of threat, which is measured in terms of habitat loss. The 34 territorial spots for conservation of biodiversity have been identified worldwide. The two hotspots, Western Ghats and Eastern Himalayan, are in India. Flagship and umbrella species. A flagship species is a species chosen to represent an environmental cause, such as an ecosystem in need of conservation. These species are chosen for their vulnerability, attractiveness, or defectiveness in order to generate the supports and acknowledgement from the public at large. Thus, the concept of flagship species holds that by giving publicity to a few key species, that supports given to those species will successfully leverage conservation of the entire ecosystem. The umbrella species are species selected for making conservation related decision, typically because the protecting these species indirectly protects many other species that makes up the ecological community of its habitat. Major approaches to management. We have a moral duty to look after our planet and pass it on a good health to our future generations. We may appreciate the fact that the most effective and efficient mechanism for conserving the biodiversity is to prevent future destructions or degradation of habitat by us. There are two basic strategies to conserve biodiversity. 1. In situ conservation. These approaches includes the protection of group of individual ecosystem through a network of protected areas, that is conservation in natural habitat. It includes the biosphere reserve, national park, and world wildlife sanctuaries. 2. Ex situ conservation. These approaches includes the protection of plants, animals outside the natural habitat for medicinal and other purposes, that is includes seed bank, botanical garden, zoological garden, and aquarium. Most people recognize that diversity at all levels is important and need to be conserved. The point to make stress during conservation strategies are: A. Measure and incentive for conservation and sustainable use of biological diversity. To be regulate access to genetic resource and traditional knowledge, including prior informed consent of the party providing resource. 3. Sharing in a fair and equity way the results of research and development of benefits arises from the commercial and other utilization of genetic resources with the contracting party provided such research. Governments and or local communities that provides the traditional knowledge or biodiversity resource utilized. D. Access to and transfer to technology, including biotechnology, to the government and or local communities that provide the traditional knowledge and or biodiversity resources. E. Technical and scientific cooperation. F. Impact assessment. G. Education and public awareness. H. Provision of financial resource. I. National reporting on efforts to implement the treaty commitment. Brief outline of policies and plans and strategies dealing with biodiversity. Policies, plans, and strategy. National Forest Policy 1988. Outbrief of priority. It provides for national goals and guidelines relating to area under the forest, afforestation, social forestry, and farm forestry, management of state forest rights and concession, diversions of forest lands for non-forest purposes, wildlife conservation, tribal people and forest, shifting cultivation, damage to forest from encroachments, fire and grazing, forest-based industries, etc. The policy also converts forest education, research management, survey and databases, legal supports, infrastructure development and financial support. Policies, plans and strategy. National Conservation Strategy and Policy Statement of Environment and Sustainable Development 1992. Brief outline of priority. Outlines the nature and dimensions of environmental problems in India, as well as the action taken and constraints and agenda from the actions. 3. The policies, plans and strategy. The national policies and macro level action strategies on biodiversity 1999. The brief outline of priority. The outlines a series of macro level statement of policies, gaps and strategies needed for conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity. 4. Policies, plans and diversity. The National Agriculture Policy 2000. Brief outline of priorities. This seeks to actualize the vast untapped growth potentially of Indian agriculture, rural infrastructure, value additional secure a fair standard to living for farmers and agricultural workers, discourage migrations to urban areas, and face the challenges arises out of economic and liberalization and globalization. 5. National Seed Policy 2002. Brief outline of priority. The trust area includes the varietal developmental protection, the quality assured seed distributions and marketing, infrastructure facility, etc. 6. National Wildlife Action Plan 2002 to 2016. The calls for development and implementations of strategies covering strengthening and enhancing the PA network, effective management of PS, conservation of wild and endangered species and their habitat, restorations of degraded habitat outside PS, the control of poaching and illegal trade in wild animal and plant species, monitoring and research, HR development, ensuring people's participation, awareness and education, wildlife tourism, domestic legislations and international convention, enhancing financial allocations and integrations with other sectoral programs. 7. Comparative Marine Fishing Policy 2004. The aims to maximize the yield from marine fishery resource while balancing the development needs of a various categories of fishing community. 8. National Environmental Policy 2006. The stated objective includes conservation of critical environmental resource 2. Intra-generational equity, livelihoods security for poor. 3. Intra-generational equity. 4. In integrations of environmental concerns in economic and social development. 5. Efficiency in environmental resource use. 6. Environmental governments. 7. Enhancement of resource for environment conservation. 7. 11th 5-year plan 2007 to 2012. They called for the development strategy that is sensitive to growing environmental concerns and called for careful evaluations of the threats and trade-off. 8. National Forestry Actions. The NYSAGE Development Coordination Program for Sustainable Management for Forest and Forest Lands to meet the environmental, socio-economic and cultural needs of the present and future generations. 8. National Biotechnological Development Strategies 2007. The prioritize key policy recommendations and interventions related to human resource, infrastructure development and manufacturing and regulatory mechanisms. 9. National Forest Commission's report 2006. Contains over 350 recommendations regarding organizational structures and functions of forestry sectors. 9. The final technical report, National Biodiversity Strategies and Action Plan Project 2005. The identifies a detailed set of priority issues for the overall planning and governance, as well as for the conservation of wild as well as the domesticated biodiversity. 10. National Action Plan on Climatic Changes 2008. 8th National Commission NVCH, and among these 4 national mission on water sustaining Himalayan ecosystem, sustainable agriculture and green India are directly relevant to biodiversity conservation. Biodiversity conservation threats and constraints. Habitat fragmentation, degradation and loss and shrinkage of genetic diversity. The loss and fragmentations of natural habitat affects all animals and plant species. Various species of plants and animals are on the decline due to the habitat fragmentations and over exploration. Examples: habitat of great land bustard in Madhya Pradesh, Gujarat, Rajasthan, and of lion-tailed macaque in Western Ghats. The loss of habitat and over-exploitations have led to the depletion of genetic diversity of several wild animals and cultivated plants. 2. Declining natural resource base and over-exploitations of resources. The degradation of forest results from illicit felling, excessive removal of forest product, fodder, fuel wood, forest floor litter, overgrazing and forest fires. As a result, some of the floristic and faunal components, including many keystones and endemic forest species, are now left with narrow eroding populations which needs to be urgently conserved. Through 3. Invasive alien species. The major plant invasive species includes the Lantana camara, Eupatorian odoratum, E. adenoporum, Pranthinum, Hysteroporus, Agratum, Cozoids, Micania, Micrantha, Prosopius, Juliflora, Chytisus, Scorparius, etc. The alien aquatic weeds like water hyacinth are increasingly choking waterways and degrading freshwater ecosystem. A recent inducer, the African catfish, also called as a Thai mugar, seems to possess even far greater threats to native fish fauna. Climatic change and desertification. And 5. Impact of development projects. National Biodiversity Authority (NBA). 1. The NBA, established in October 2003, pursuant to Section 8 of BDA. Two, the focuses and advises a goal on conservation of biodiversity, sustainable uses of its component, and securing equitable sharing of benefits arises out of utilization of biological resource. Three, regulates access to biological resource and associated traditional knowledge for research and or commercial purposes, bio survey and bio utilization, as well as transfer of research results seeking IPR and third party transfer of bioresource. 4. Advise the state government in the actions of area of importance as biodiversity heritage sites and measure for the management of such sites. 5. It has constituted the expert committee to perform functions such as laying down the procedure and guidelines to govern the activities such as assess and benefit sharing, prior information consent, mutually agreed terms, and intellectual property right IPR. The list of normal traded commodities, establishment of heritage sites and management, national designed repositories, and safeguarding of traditional knowledge respecting the Article 8J of CBD. Uh, 6. It may take measures necessary to behalf of goal to oppose the grant of IPR which do not adhere to the PIC and MAT. 7. They coordinate the activities of a state biodiversity board and large number of local level biodiversity management commits by providing them with technical guidance and financial assessment. 8. The commission studies and sponsors the investigations and research on preparation of a PBR to document the rich valuable knowledges of local people on biodiversity and conducts the capacity building programs. Invasive alien species. 1. 173 alien plant species recorded in India. 2. The India focuses international quarantine regulations. 3. Directorate of Plant Protection's quarantine and storage. Faridabad Ministry of Agriculture is the nodal agents to enforce to the regulations, lost regulations or plant quarantine order 2003. 4. The Environmental Protection Act 1986 rules 1989 states to prohibit or restrict the substances having the potential to cause damage to environmental plants and animals. Say 5. The ICFRE has established a forest invasive species FISL in Forest Research Institute FRI to deal with various aspects of management of forest invasive species in country. The legislation relevant to biodiversity conservation. Relevant key legislations: the Wildlife Protection Act 1972. Key feature: that deals with the protection of wildlife and habitats and provides for the protections of wildlife, birds, plants, and related matter, with a view to ensuring the ecological and environmental security to the country. 2. For Indian Forest Act 1927. The designs for forest management and protection, the transit of forest and the duty leviable to timber and other forest producer. 3. Forest Conservation Act, designed for the conservation of forest and related matter. 4. Biological Diversity Act 2002 provides for conservation of biological diversity, sustainable use of its components, and fair equitable sharing of its benefits arises out of the use of biological resource knowledge and related matter. 5. Biological Diversity Rules in 2004 deals with operationalizing the Biological Diversity Act. 6. Protection of Plant Varieties and Farmers Right Act 2001 provided for the establishment of an effective systems for protection of plant varieties, the right of farmers, plant breeders, and encourage the development of new varieties of plant. 6. The scheme tribes and other traditional forest dwellers. Recognition of Forest Right Act 2006. Key features: recognizes and vests the traditional right to forest dwelling communities over access to forest goods and occupations in forest lands. Indian case studies on conservation management and conservation management strategies. The government of India has developed a new few strategies for conservation of biodiversity, like Project Tiger, Biosphere Reserves, etc. Project Tiger. The Project Tiger launches in 1973 to 1974 is one of the most successful conservation ventures in the recent times. The project aims at tiger conservation is especially constituted tiger reserves, which are representatives of various biogeographical regions falling within our country. It strives to maintain a viable tiger populations in natural environment. The protection was launched in 1973, and various tiger reserves were created in the country on a core buffer strategy. The core area were freed from other sorts of human activities, and the buffer areas were subjected to conservation oriented land use. The management plans were drawn up for each tiger reserves based on the principle outlined below. 1. Eliminations of all forms of human exploitations and biotic disturbance from one core area, and rationalizations of activity in the buffer zone. 2. Restrictions the habitat management only to repair the damage done to the ecosystem by human and other interferences to facilitate the recovery of a ecosystem to its natural state. 3. Monitoring the faunal and flora changes over time and carrying out research out wildlife. The initially 9 tigers reserves were established in different status during the period of 1973 to 1974 by pooling the resource available with the central and state governments. These 9 reserves covers an area of about 13,017 square kilometer via Manas, Assam, Palamau, Bihar, and Simlipal, Odisha, and Corbett, UA, and Kana, Madhya Pradesh, Belghat, Maharashtra, Bandipur, Karnataka, Ranthambore, Rajasthan, and Sundarbans, West Bengal. The project started as a central sector scheme with a full assistance of central government till 1979 to 80. Later, it becomes a centrally sponsored scheme from 1980 to 81, with equally sharing of expenditure between the center and the states. Tiger Reserve, different states. Research name of the tiger reserves: Bandipur, 1973 to 74, state Karnataka, area 872.24 in square kilometer, and area of buffer 584.06, and total area 1456.3 kilometers. Corbett, 1973 to 74, Uttarakhand, area of core critical tiger habitat 821.22, and area of buffer 466.32, total area 1288.31. Amangarh, the area 2012, year of creation 2012, state Uttar Pradesh, area of buffer வந்து 80.6, total area 80.6. 3. Kanha, area year of creations 1973 to 1974, state Madhya Pradesh, area of core critical tiger habitat 917.43, area of buffer per periphery in square kilometers 1134.36, and total area 2051.79. 4. Manas, year of creation 1973 to 1974,